Hey there, Cinephiles. Today we're getting right into it because I'm ranking every single classic Universal monster movie. There are 30 films in this box set, and it seemed like the best list compiled for all of the classic Universal monster movies. I know everyone has their own list on what counts and what doesn't, but I felt like this one was kind of the best one to go off of. I have the full list of movies on the screen now for you to see them, and the last note I'll make is that I watched these movies in order of release. I felt like that was the best way to experience all of these films. But nevertheless, let's get into my rankings for every single classic Universal monster movie. Coming in at number 30 and dead last, I have She-Wolf of London. Released in 1946, this was the 24th movie of the marathon. This was truly disappointing. How do you have a monster film and not show the monster in any capacity? The only way they really showed the main character being the monster was her wrapped in clothing and potentially being a werewolf. Now, many people might say that that was the point of the film, but it just does it in such a way that it just felt lazy and it felt like it was being restricted on purpose. Especially with that ending attempting to be this Hitchcockian type of film, a lot of it just didn't work. It was boring, and it felt like it was holding back as much as it could. This is genuinely one of the few films in this entire catalog that just annoyed me very much. Coming in at 29, I have The Mummy's Tomb. Released in 1942, this was the 15th film of the marathon. That means this was the halfway point, and this kinda had me questioning why I was doing this. This felt like a lot of current day legacy sequels. It just felt so much like an attachment to the film that came prior to it, and for some reason this had so much footage from the film before it. I don't know why I had to watch both movies. I genuinely think it was at least 50% of this movie was just the last movie as a recap. And then for this movie to not build on the last one in any significant way except for killing off a character that was in it prior, I don't know, it was everything wrong with a legacy sequel, but it happened to happen in the 1940s. It was kind of an odd experience to watch this. Also, one of the prevalent themes in all of these films is the sins of the father passing down to the child, and this does it in the worst way in the whole catalog. Coming in at 28, I have The Mummy's Curse. This was released in 1944, and it was the 22nd film of the marathon. Around this point of the journey, there was two distinct storylines happening. One had Dracula, the Wolfman, and Frankenstein's monster, and the other was this not great storyline with the mummy. At this point too, you'll see a trend starting to happen with me not really liking the Mummy movies, and that's because it just does the same thing over and over and over again, where the mummy is trying to get back his dead love, and there's this secret society that helps the mummy do that, and it doesn't do it well most of the time, if not all of the time, and when it tries to add something new to this formula, it just doesn't work for me. Coming in at 27, I have The Mummy's Ghost. Released in 1944, this is the 20th film of the journey, and if it weren't for that ending that saves the rest of the film, this would have been truly bland and just bad. Unengaging at almost every turn, it's truly that unique ending that saves it from the rest of the Mummy films as well as the worst films that I've listed so far. It's just so blah that I've forgotten most of it, again, except for that ending. I just really liked where it ended because it wasn't exactly what I expected. It wasn't necessarily the most groundbreaking ending, but compared to the rest of these films, I like that was at least different. In 26th place, I have Dracula's Daughter. This one came out in 1936, and it was the 7th film of the journey. This one had such great potential that it wasn't even close to achieving greatly. Don't get me wrong, it is a step up from the other films that I've mentioned so far, but the reason it's so low is because I don't remember a lot of this movie. I had to go back to my notes to even somewhat remember what happened. In this one, as many other films do in this catalog, this one has the main character of Dracula's daughter trying not to become her father. She doesn't want to succumb to that evil. She wants to actually break out and not fall into the familial curse. And for as interesting of an idea as that sounds, it just doesn't work. You do get this attempt at sustainably deep characters in here, but again, there just isn't really anything to latch onto as much as you would hope. For a lot of these movies, I would love to see them be remade, but this one in particular I think could truly benefit as a horror sapphic tale done today. Coming in at 25, I have The Invisible Man's Revenge. This came out in 1944, and it was the 19th film of the journey. Somehow, even the worst Invisible Man film still has great practical effects. Of all the Invisible Man films, you'll see how high they actually kind of rank, not to spoil the list. This was the only one that I was actually let down by. It unfortunately got to the point where I was asking myself, what are we doing here? And it was out of boredom. Coming in at 24, I have Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. This came out in 1955, and this was the 19th film of the journey. At this point, I felt like this movie was more a fever dream than an actual film. There were so many jokes about Mummy and Mommy. It was, it was kind of low-hanging fruit, but they loved going to it. And overall, of the 3 Abbott and Costello movies that are in this, it's the worst one easily. This is one of the films in here that I don't think I'll ever watch again because it just felt so disjointed and it felt like it was just made to be made, despite a few scenes being enjoyable. And it's really funny too that of the Abbott and Costello ones, even The Mummy is the worst one. Coming in at 23, I have The Creature Walks Among Us. This came out in 1956 and it was the 30th and final film of the journey. And honestly, not the worst way to go. There's some stuff in here that works better outside of the context of the film in the sense of me going through all of these movies. It works more symbolically than actually what it does for the film. This one tries to do something a little different and it works sometimes, but not exactly as much as you would hope. And it's nice too because this holds true the general idea of all of these films, and that's men are the true monsters, more so than the monsters themselves. This one's still pretty fresh in my mind, but watching it a little burnt out for all of these films, especially in such quick succession. I think I would grow to appreciate this one a little bit more down the line, but as of right now, this is where it stands. At 22, I have Revenge of the Creature. This one came out in 1955, and it was the 28th film of this marathon. There's this whole SeaWorld aspect and captivity aspect to this that works well enough, but overall as a movie, it's just not as engaging as you'd hope, especially following the film prior to this. There are some interesting things here, and it does have that theme of not messing with nature, but as a movie overall, it's just pretty okay. It's fine. I'm sure you'll find some enjoyability with it. It's not bad, but it's also not great, and at this point so far into the journey, if you're not going to be something so memorable and do something so out there or spectacular, you're just going to be kind of forgotten. At number 21, I have Dracula. Coming out in 1931, this was the first film of this entire series, which I'm sure is going to get a lot of people mad at me, but look, outside of the wonderful and stellar visuals, what else does this film have going for it? I know many people love Bela Lugosi as the titular character, but he's just not quite enough to save this movie, especially because so much of this movie is surrounding him instead of actually being him. The general atmosphere of this film is absolutely gorgeous with the cinematography and just the eeriness that oozes throughout this, but my goodness, it's boring and it lacks so many things that I feel like could have made this movie soar. Yes, there are plentiful things that are iconic in this movie, but again, that just lies within the imagery. Without a true sense of story or characters surrounding it, it's just fine. And I gotta say, thankfully, this was at 21 because I was so worried that so many of these films would be below this, and I'm glad they weren't. At number 20, I have Son of Dracula. This came out in 1943, and it was the 18th film in this franchise. About 24 minutes into this film, you get 2 amazing shots in this. And the final shot of this film, too, holds so much weight dramatically. It's kind of great. It's just unfortunate that so much of the rest of this film doesn't hold as much engagement and just your attention as you would hope. The ideas behind those wonderful shots that I've mentioned, it's all great in theory, and it even works still to a certain degree because of how impactful they are in the context of the film. But with so much else of the movie just not being up to par with those shots, it does falter quite a bit. I still personally hold this one above the original Dracula because the characters are there a bit more too. Even though it's still at number 20 for a reason, it's overall just a bit lackluster. At number 19, I have The Werewolf of London. This came out in 1935, and it was the 6th film of the catalog. Probably the biggest surprise to me was that this was released prior to The Wolfman, which is obviously the much more iconic werewolf. And even though I did enjoy this film, this falls into a trap that many of these films do, and that's the ideas are far greater than the execution. I do see why they kind of rebooted this character a little later on, but for the film itself, again, there was a lot of great ideas in here, especially with the botanist being the werewolf and just, you know, having to struggle with that fact and his love life as well as his professional life, and all of it just being these exciting metaphors, but it's just too much of a mixed bag of a film for me to really put this any higher. At number 18, I have Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man. This came out in 1951, and it's the 26th film of the catalog. One thing I always find funny about every Invisible Man film is that after the first one, it's all these story by credits for H.G. Wells, and they always read as suggested by him, which I just find kind of hilarious that they're attributing this to the author of the novel. Of course, you should give credit where credit is due, but it's just pretty funny because I don't think he saw this quite happening with his works. Anyways, one thing I do gotta say about this film is that it's incredibly convoluted. Abbott and Costello play these detectives who are found by a fugitive who's framed for the murder of his manager, and the reason he finds these detectives is so that way they can help him clear his name. However, he also happens to know this scientist who has the invisible serum, so therefore he makes the detectives pretend to be a boxer and a manager himself, so that way Abbott and Costello could fight the guy in the ring, so that way the Invisible Man can get his revenge and clear his name all before he loses his mind because he's invisible. And I just feel like we lost the plot at some point because what in the world was that? Anyways, there are some great things in here, such as when the guy turns invisible the first time, you see him just kind of lean his head back and laugh, and you just see everything start to disappear with his teeth going last. And then there's also this bit with money between Abbott and Costello that's actually pretty funny. It just is unfortunate that it's so convoluted and that a lot of other parts of this film is just At number 17, I have The Mummy's Hand. This came out in 1940, and it's the 10th film of the catalog. This one's pretty funny because I don't think it's a great movie or even good for that matter, but it's still entertaining and had very early blockbuster vibes. It's also very interesting because this feels like it has DNA from the original Mummy from 1932, as well as being a very early prototype for the 1999 version. And you know, I'm sure I'll just put this on one day just to have a fun little time because again, it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's just fun, and I like that idea of that it's not taking itself too seriously, and it's also just really cool to see a very early prototype of a blockbuster. At number 16, I have The Mummy. This came out in 1932, and it's the third film in this marathon. There are pieces in here that would make for a truly tragic and devastating love story, and yet overall it just feels like it's missing the mark over and over again. A tale of the twisted lengths of love and what someone's willing to do to reclaim it is again an idea that's so wonderful, but it's just missing, you know? But hey, at least Imhotep is a very interesting character. At the 15th slot, I have Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. This came out in 1948, and it was the 25th film of this journey. This was the first time that we went full spoof mode, and honestly, it was kind of fun. There's this fun little cartoon intro, and Abbott and Costello are just great people to have running around in the Monsters universe, even though it does add some stuff that doesn't quite fully make sense, such as one thing that actually got me angry, which was we saw Dracula's reflection in the mirror. I get it's a comedy, but come on, let's stick to some things here. And also, I will say one thing that kind of drags this movie down a little bit is that it does feel a little MCU-esque a bit, in the sense that there's these fan servicey moments. So you're like, oh, this person's in here, it doesn't quite fit in the story, but they're shoehorning them in, and it's, you know. But there's still a lot of fun bits and characters and interactions overall that it's still a fun time. Fun's a very optimal word here because there are great bits between Abbott and Costello and just the monsters, and in general, it's an enjoyable watch. At 14, I have The Son of Frankenstein. This came out in 1939, and it's the 8th film in this catalog. First thing when I saw that year is that this also came out the year of Wizard of Oz, so that's pretty cool. But anyways, this has two main things going for it. You have the whole storyline where the sins of the father is passing down to the son, and he doesn't want to become his father, so that's great dramatic work there. But then you also have this Igor side story where it does feel much more cheesy and B-movie, and this movie doesn't know how to blend the two. I wish it did, because it could have allowed for a multi-layered film, especially in this dramatized monster movie. But overall, you can tell it struggles balancing the two tones and the types of stories it wants to tell succinctly here. With that being said, I did enjoy both sides. It's just, I wish they blended together a bit better. At number 13, I have The Ghost of Frankenstein. This came out in 1942, and funny enough, this was the 13th film of my journey. If you want Igor in a Frankenstein film, this is the film for you, because oh my goodness, is he a great villain, and in this one in particular, particular, you just have a ball with him. And where the story ends in this film, I wish they did capitalize on that later on in these films, but they never quite did. But I digress. What actually happens in this film is so great. There are some issues in here, but if you're watching purely for Igor, you're gonna have a great time. It's just everything else is just pretty average to I wish it did a little bit better. But hey, this one's definitely worth checking out. At number 12, I have The Wolfman. This came out in 1940, and this was the 12th film I saw on my journey. There's the great Wolfman design and many iconic shots in this, as well as the beginning of low-key one of the best characters in this whole catalog, if not the best character, Lawrence Talbot. This wasn't as great as I wanted it to be, but this was still a very interesting time. For as awkward as it can be at times, it still does have this nice and eerie kind of tone with it, especially anytime we're in the woods. And just art-wise, overall, this was great. Like, obviously that can be said for most of these films, but genuinely in this one too, it's one of the better looking ones. At number 11, I have The Invisible Woman. This came out in 1940, and it's the 11th film released in this catalog. This was the first time we had a true departure of full-on tone in these films. This one was a straight romantic comedy, and you knew it was a comedy from the very first scene. Genuinely was not expecting that, but it was a welcome surprise. From what I've seen online, though, there are many people who don't like this movie, but I think that's just wrong. I think it's a pretty good film. The vibes are different, as it's much less about horror, but rather somewhat revenge, but mostly this rom-com aspect. And you know, it's just a delightful little time. Like, it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it's fun. I feel like I'm starting to say that a good amount right now. At number 10, I have The Invisible Agent. From 1942, this is the 14th film in this catalog. One thing about these Invisible Man films is that it's not afraid to change up the genre, and I am here for it, because what do you mean we are getting this wartime spy thriller with sci-fi elements due to the invisible serum? I mean, and it still kind of works. It's not horror, but it works. Again, I don't know why many people don't like this one either, just like The Invisible Woman, but I enjoyed myself and I would rewatch this. At number 9, I have Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. From 1943, this is the 16th film in the catalog. This is the first of many crossover events between any of these characters, and you can tell because it goes big. Funny enough, though, this works so spectacularly as a Wolfman sequel, but not so great as a Frankenstein sequel, because the bastardization of the Frankenstein monster in this was appalling. However, it made up so much ground for Lawrence Talbot, as well as some other films that I'll get to in a little bit, that it's just so clearly better than the Wolfman. I really enjoyed his character. It made me really like his character, at least start to. It is pretty unfortunate what it does for Frankenstein's monster, and that abrupt ending, one of the most abrupt endings ever, is a bit of a sore spot, but everything else I thought really worked in this film. At number 8, I have House of Frankenstein. At number 8, I have House of Frankenstein. This came out in 1944, and it's the 21st film in this catalog. Now, we thought Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman was a crossover for the ages. This was even greater. We get Dracula, we get the Wolfman, and we get a tiny bit of Frankenstein's monster. Kind of annoying that it's titled the way it is, because he's like the least of the monsters that you get. You do feel the influence of Dr. Frankenstein's findings though, but it's just not as much as you would want. Also, there's some great stunt casting in here. You have Boris Karloff, who was the original Frankenstein's monster, as the guy trying to find Dr. Frankenstein's findings, and it just works pretty well. But again, the one who benefits most from any team up is the Wolfman and Lawrence Talbot, because this just continued my deep appreciation for his character in here. It can be a bit scattershot at times, but overall it's just a fun movie, and it's a team-up movie, so I just really liked it. At number 7, I have The Invisible Man Returns. This came out in 1940, and it's the 9th film of this journey. The scientist gone mad trope is always going to hit. As a sequel to the first Invisible Man, this kind of more so plays as a rebootquel, because it's practically just the first film done over again, and we get to see the Invisible Man before he turns invisible. So therefore, we get to see his nice side before he, gets mean. And for as great as that addition is, there's just something quite missing from the Invisible Man himself that isn't quite as captivating as the first film. But either way, I do want to praise once more, the Invisible Man effects are the best in any of these franchises, and this is just no different. It's making you believe you're seeing an invisible man, which I know, an oxymoron, but it's great. At number 6, we have Frankenstein. From 1931, this is the second film in this catalog, and it's a monumental one. Look, it is iconic, it is grand, there are so many things that society takes from this film, but it is a little lackluster in certain areas, at least compared to my top 5. Also, just visually, man, the sets, the cinematography, so much of this is spectacular. But then there are so many moments I do find myself a bit wanting, you know? And a lot of that has to do with the actual storyline itself, just like Dracula before it. But the great thing about this one is that it has actual characters. And yeah, man, it's really good. At number 5, I have Creature from the Black Lagoon. From 1954, this is the 27th watch of this catalog. And this is the final icon introduced, but he is easily one of my favorites. I love that little gill man. In this, there's environmental horror, you have shades of Jaws inspiration, and just the idea of getting to do underwater horror at this time is just, it's really cool. And it's done pretty well, all things considered. Also, shout out to the human characters that I actually cared for. But obviously the best thing about this movie is the Gillman himself and just everything about him, his design, his sound, the score that blares every time he's on the screen. It's all wonderful. At number 4, I have Phantom of the Opera. From 1943, this is the 17th film in this viewing experience. And this is the only one that's in color, which obviously makes it quite different enough, but also this is the only time we ever see this character in any of these films too. And also, this is the first time I've ever seen anything Phantom of the Opera related. I know there's so many variations out there, including the stage production, the musical, film as well, and just an even older version of this film too from the 20s. But with this being the first time I ever seen anything of it, this intrigued me enough to actually want to see every single other iteration. Shout out to Claude Rains, who has a great performance in this too, as well as the other characters in here. They're just some of the best side characters. And also the way they play with the shadows and slowly unveiling more and more of the Phantom. It's really great too. At number 3, I have The Bride of Frankenstein. This came out in 1935, and it's the 5th film released in this catalog. Now look, I understand she's only in the last 5 minutes of the movie, if that, but she does have an iconic look, and the idea of her is what drives a lot of this film, and it drives it very well. As a sequel to Frankenstein, this is a great companion piece, and in fact actually makes the first film better. Do I wish we had more of the bride as an actual character? Yes, 1,000 times yes. This isn't the most perfect movie ever, and it's not even my favorite of these movies. It's number 3, but everything that it does show, it shows it pretty well. There's this other scientist still trying to mess with Victor Frankenstein and actually blackmail him, as well as Frankenstein's monster makes a friend who's blind, and there's just so many great scenes in this, and just combining it with the first film actually enhances both movies. So I wish I could count them as one, but ranking them separately, this is just a great film on its own. At number 2, I have House of Dracula. This came out in 1945, and it's the 23rd film of this journey, and to me, this is the ultimate group film. We get Dracula, we get the Wolfman, we get Frankenstein's monster, and we get the introduction of a new scientist who goes mad, and we get to see that madness start to infiltrate his brain, because his whole journey in this is wonderful as he just tries to help out these monsters to get better. And that's the whole movie. That's honestly insane. And for what it is, it does it pretty well and very much enjoyably. And for it being called House of Dracula, you don't get as much Dracula as you think you would, but nevertheless, you do feel the consequences of Dracula's actions throughout the whole film. And it's just a great experience if you want to showcase more than one of these creatures at a time. If you're looking to see an ultimate film for the Universal monsters, especially the classic ones, this is definitely it. But as this is my personal list of my favorites and ranking all of these films, it's not quite number 1. And what is at number 1? Well, that's of course The Invisible Man. Released in 1933 and is the 4th film of this entire catalog. It shot up to my number 1 as soon as I saw it, and it stayed there easily. I love this character. He is so sassy, and just the drip on him, insane. I always want to dress up as him, but everyone always loves to dress up as him, so I'll wait for 1 year to eventually do that. But the best part of it is you feel him going crazier and crazier. And just verge into being diabolical. It's so fun. It's so entertaining. The visual effects that they're able to do at the time, mind-blowing, truly. I would love to try and attempt to do these right now on a small budget. You rarely get any character that will be as great as the titular character in this. Lawrence Talbot kind of is close, especially with the amount of films that you get to be with him. But with this version of the Invisible Man, you only get him once, and the performance to make his character alive, it's like nothing else. And even too, the hijinks that ensue throughout the entire film, it's so engaging, and it's just a wonderful watch. I might have to watch this once a year from now on. But alright, that's my thoughts and rankings on every single classic Universal Monster movie. Be sure to let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below, in the sense of my rankings as well as where you think certain movies should be. Let me know your favorites. Let me know your least favorites. If you want to give me all 30 rankings, if you've seen them all, let me know that too. It was such a blast going through all of these films. It took me a couple of months to get through all of them because, well, it's 30 movies and I have to watch other movies and do reviews for them. But this was definitely worth it. And if you stayed this long, thank you for watching. Thank you for watching any amount of this video too. I hope you all enjoy Halloween and this Halloween special for the channel. Be sure to stay tuned for more Yeti Films content, and I'll write you later.